the Connecticut Economic Development Association's 2017 Member of the Year Award, which recognizes a member who has exhibited true leadership in economic development in Connecticut and has implemented an initiative that demonstrates real results and outcomes in the past year. And I thought it was important that we
Thank you, Karen, for doing that.
mention that.
Proud of Bronk. He's done a great job.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any county communications? Bonnie?
I went to the OAPD, is that what it is? The fly-in on Friday, and Rich went on Saturday. It was terrific. The number of people that were here for that event was just staggering. It was wonderful that we were able to host such a good thing.
It was a great event. I went there with my 8-year-old on Saturday, and it was a great event. Like a lot of people, a lot of interesting planes. It was fun. A lot of fun.
And then I also went to Fall Festival, as
Thank you.
many of all of you did.
Diane?
I also went to the Fall Festival, met a lot of people, and it was nice. I will say this, though, and I don't know if this is the time. I was asked about a grant that the BOE received for the middle schools, and I didn't know anything about it. I guess it was in the paper, and I missed it.
The Board of Ed.
The Board of Ed received grants for the middle schools, and I wonder if we can start having some type of liaison and emails on when something like this happens, because I was questioned, why don't I know? I'm a town councilor. I should know what's going on in the town. So I think we need more communication between the Board of Ed and us.
And Dr. Grenier is planning on being here to give a quick update on the 24th, and he's going to start implementing that coming here. So hopefully that'll help.
Well, the question was how this is going to turn into play when we're going to one middle school and 2 of the middle schools got a grant, received a grant that I didn't have any answers for.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything on it.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Someone want to move the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8 to 0 to 0. Anybody have any unfinished business? Great. We'll move on to new business. 2017-0221 preliminary results of operations, fiscal year ending 2017. I think Cindy Landry is here, Director of Finance. Hi, Cindy.
Good evening to everyone.
Hi.
Cindy.
As you know, the fiscal year 17 ended on June 30th, and we are in the midst of the annual audit. We expect that will be completed by the end of December. So I'm here tonight to present to you preliminary results of operations for 2017. I have prepared a memo for you with some attachments. I'd like to just give a little bit of an overview. I am happy to say that we did end the year a little bit better than we had anticipated in May. We did think we were going to need an additional amount of fund balance to balance the year, and we found that we have not. We would actually be returning money to fund balance at the end of this year, and that's primarily because between May and September, we received more revenue than we had anticipated, and we also have more appropriations will be closed out, were not spent. If I could refer you to attachment 1. This gives you the comparison by function of the expenditures, and if you were to look at town departments, well, let me say totally we returned $1.4 million of appropriations for this year. And you'll see that town departments, which includes all of the departments from legislative policy through Parks and Rec, returned $1.051 million. And then the non-departmentals and add contributions to other funds, which we call town operations, returned a total of 1.054. Now, the Board of Education did return $261,000, but if you'll recall, the Board of Ed had agreed to return the $247,000 for ECS in the fall last year that we knew was going to not be received from the state. So they returned an additional $13,000 over the 247. So that was the 1.4 million that we had anticipated that was returned. We had expected it to only be about $365,000 in May. So attachment 2 lists the revenue by detail, and we did receive an additional, little over $600,000 in additional revenue than we had anticipated in May. And primarily that was, we had, if you recall during the budget, we used the governor's fiscal 17 estimates for state revenue. And in that, we had not expected to receive the full amount of the Pequot grant. We ultimately did. And that was an additional $445,000. And we had some other, throughout other departments that also had more money than we had anticipated. Conveyance tax came in with a little bit more. Other revenue, which included the easements that we had received money throughout the year. Those were the ones that came in over budget. We did have property taxes did come in slightly under budget at $158,000, but I did want it to note that that does reflect the anticipated overpayment for Oddfellows we have taken out of taxes based on the pilot agreement. So that is, if we had not had that overpayment, we would have been over budget this year for taxes. The final attachment gives you the reconciliation from fund balance in May to September. And you will note that in May, we had anticipated using the additional $400,000 of fund balance. And you'll see for September, we're actually going to be returning the $1.2 million. We will not be needing any additional fund balance. And our fund balance percentage will increase from, we had the minimum of 7 3/4, is anticipated to be the 9.16%, which is very good. Very good.
Thank you very much, councilors. Dean?
The figures, of course, are unaudited. In your experience, when they're eventually audited, did you discover wide discrepancies, or is this pretty much the picture?
It's pretty much. I would also think the auditors have been on site. They were here in September. If there was anything of significance, I would expect them to have already notified me of that. So I don't expect there to be any, if there were any variances, it would be very, very minor to these numbers.
Thank you.
Diane?
Can you come back with good news like this after the governor sends us his budget?
I'm hoping to. I was glad to be able to have good news because we haven't had good news on that side, so it was.
Nice job, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Cindy. I have a, I'm wondering the amount that's, I mean, I appreciate the fact that I think just about every department came in under, and they tightened the belt. And I know that I know, John, you had been talking about getting the department heads in more often to talk. I'm interested to talk to Gary specifically because he was cut in that last year's budget that closed out substantially, and he's still coming in under budget, and like to find out if there's people that weren't hired, like what was there, why was there, and the same thing with the chief of police to find out from a public safety standpoint. I believe he was cut in that budget as well and still came in under. So kudos to really everybody, all the directors and the department heads. Can we also reach out to the city and find out how they did with public works and with public safety?
I will.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Anybody else? Thanks, Cindy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next item is 2017-0218, Proposed Charter Revision Draft Report. And this is on the agenda for the council to have a discussion regarding the charter as it was submitted by the Charter Revision Commission and to have a discussion about it. John had sent out an email earlier this week, and I think the council was on board with the council having a discussion tonight and then inviting the Charter Revision Commission back next Tuesday to have a meeting together. So that's what I believe our intent is. So, Harry?
I just want to mention I can't be there, but that's, I mean, that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you certainly have a quorum, but I have a planned vacation next week.
Yeah, well, it was supposed to be a no meeting date, so.
Yeah, right, thank you.
Understood, yep. So, we had a public hearing and heard from a lot of people. I think a lot of good points were made, interesting things were said. And I think the council tonight, if everybody's on board, is to kind of look at the changes, have discussions about them, figure out what we'd like to talk to the Charter Revision Commission about, and then have that discussion next Tuesday. Is that everybody okay with that? All right. I had made a list of a lot of the changes that had come up that were in the charter. And there were, you know, I know that a lot of people on the Charter Revision Commission had said, I think, and Bob and Yura, I think you said that there weren't that many changes. When I listed them all out, it seemed like there were a lot of changes. So we can, you know, just throw these up, lob them out there and have a discussion about them. So I'll just take the first one. Replace the RTM with the Board of Finance. So how do the councilors feel about that? Anybody? Bonnie?
I'm in favor of it. I do have some reservations about us. If we switch, then the council has to have minority representation. I don't know if I'm good with that or not, but I do think I agree completely with Bob Frank's report, especially the part that the RTM, it's such a redundancy, and I do think if we did keep the RTM, they should do their budget first, and then, or with us, and at the same time, because it's a lot of staff time to do this budget meetings twice. It's just, and their subcommittees, the intensive things that they study, that should be presented to us beforehand and before we vote, I think. So, but I think the Board of Finance sounds like a really great idea. And, but I do, if we do it, there was a lot of people at the public hearing who felt like the Board of Finance should have representation from each district, and I'm okay with that.
Harry and then Rich?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, I mean, Groton's really a diverse community. And what I've seen and what I've read, it really doesn't offer some sort of district representation. Now, RTM does. And if you don't have district representation, you run the risk of a couple of parts of town kind of running everything. Granted, the RTM is large. I would suggest that the Charter Revision Commission consider leaving the RTM, but cutting the size. And I mean, both parties have problems finding people to fill, you know, slots on the ballot to run for RTM. By cutting the size, that would change that. So I really running the risk of not having, you know, district representation with just a small part of town possibly running the show. There was one other thing I wanted to say on this topic. So I'll come back when somebody else speaks.
Rich?
Yes, in section 3-7, voting districts, I think that all officers of the town who are chosen by election except the Board of Finance shall be elected at large. In other words, the Board of Finance being elected by districts. I think that would answer Harry's question. And of course, you know, I don't know the answer how you're going to do it right now, but I think that should be done. And then I think in the glossary of terms, there should be a section in there for the Board of Finance, along with the Board of Education that was deleted. I think those two issues should be put in there on the glossary of terms.
I remembered what I was going to say, so I can just say it was attached to what I was going to say.
Yeah.
If you eliminate the RTM and put staggered terms for four-year counselors, you have to have minority representation on the council. And that really makes it kind of crazy trying to figure out, just as the RTM has now. The reason we don't have to have minority representation on the council is because the RTM is under that restriction. So I don't know how you would figure that out if that came to pass. With staggered terms, 4 years, and ensuring that there's minority representation, it could be crazy. So that's what I was going to say. Thank you.
Diane?
To that, I believe it was discussed about reducing the RTM, and they did finally go with the Board of Finance. I am for the Board of Finance. I know that the biggest hurdle over that we heard from the public meeting was about the representation throughout the town and the city. So I don't have a problem with it being by district, being elected by district. But I think there should be some type of trigger in there that if you do not get someone from a district that is willing to run, then it should be at large. But I do not have a problem with it being by district, but I do agree with the Board of Finance.
Dean? And Karen?
All right, my thoughts. To begin with, I want to make clear what we're doing today, because if you read the paper headline or you listen to people talk, this is supposed to be where we're voting on the thing up or down, and it's nothing of the sort. I think we understand that, but I want to make that clear. We're here within the 15 days, and we will be next Tuesday when we act as a council instead of committee of the whole, to make recommendations to the commission, the Charter Revision Commission, for such changes in the draft report as it deems desirable. Now, that's not the vote up or down. That would come later. And there are people that have got strong opinions on some of the proposed changes, for, against. I would argue that we consider the draft as a draft within the four corners, and you'll notice if you go through the minutes of the meetings of the commission that even people who were against a proposed change still jumped in and offered amendments to that in order to refine what was going to be text that they initially did not approve and probably never would have approved of. So in that spirit, I think we should all be participating within the draft rather than basically trying to, this is not, like I said, not an up or down on the thing. So a lot of statements are going to be taken and outright, some people have said I'm in favor of. But there's going to be a lot of discussion, and there aren't necessarily always takeaways. Now, as far as this issue is concerned, replacing the RTM with the Board of Finance, my understanding is that there's been a desire for a number of years among some segment of the population, maybe a majority, I don't know because we've never actually asked the question, but there are people who discuss it. And I can tell you that the idea of a referendum of some form has been making the rounds for a number of years. And I think that even with complaints about the RTM, the idea was, well, if we adopt the notion of a referendum, then something else has to go, because we can't have an RTM and a referendum. So it was an eeny, meeny, miny, mo in large respect. So the RTM goes. Once the RTM goes, you're left with a council. What else do we have? Board of Finance. Okay. So I understand the impetus there. The desire is, I should say the complaint about the RTM is that it is either inert or runs counter to the council or is, as it said before, redundant. As far as redundancy is concerned, I would argue that that would be like saying that the House and the Senate and any given bicameral legislature are redundant houses. I think we have a House and a Senate for a reason. I think we have a council and an RTM for that same reason. Now, this is on paper. I don't agree with people who paint the RTM in very rosy pictures, or any other body in town for that matter. The RTM has its issues. If, in fact, the average attendance rate in the RTM is 26 out of the 41, then that would be an argument for tweaking the RTM to have fewer members. And here's what else you get from that if you were to shrink the size of the RTM. Let's be honest, when you have to find, either party has to find people to run for those positions, it is frankly a mix of folks who are dedicated, will show up, people who either mean well, try to show up, can't because of personal circumstances, and other people who honestly don't give it the commitment that it requires. So when you have to find so many candidates to fill the ballot, you are reaching deeper into the barrel than maybe you'd need to if you had a smaller RTM. I could then get, and my counterpart on the other side could then get, we would have a choice if we had to fill, for example, half the spots. So I think that's a benefit of shrinking the size of the RTM. You're going to concentrate the talent. We will not have these complaints of, well, some districts are not represented at all, and only half the members show up, and it's hard to get a quorum. So I'd be in favor of making it smaller. Now, if there were to be a Board of Finance, I think either the Board of Finance or the council should be representative. It's harder with the council. You're going to have to shrink it to 7 like it was back when they first set up the council. Or you have 7 by district and 2 at large, and why make things more complicated than it is? But one or the other probably ought to be representative. Because I think the representation is an issue. It is a large town geographically. It's a large town by district. It's a large town by demographics. I think we recognize that then. We recognize that now. So the other thing problem that I've got with the Board of Finance, and this was brought up before, and I thought about this at the beginning of the process. I thought, well, if the idea is to have a Board of Finance to provide expertise to the council, to insert it somewhere in the budget process, why not have a consultative body, like an Economic Development Commission or any other boards or commissions that we have? It turns out that there are no qualifications for the Board of Finance, so it's not necessarily composed of any experts, although let's face it, I think maybe a lot of retired financial planners are going to run for it. So it's going to draw a certain crowd of people, have a tendency to draw a certain crowd of people. It's not necessarily going to be an expert body. And also, while there's a Board of Finance, the town councils also has financial duties specified, and not simply part of the process. We have to provide quantitative guidance based on electorate knowledge by the 3rd week of January. We have to provide budget guidance. We have to provide information to the Board of Finance. We have to conduct, and I like this one, we have to conduct strategic planning sessions with staff and community stakeholders. I can imagine what a strategic planning session might be, but it seems like a large catch-all. And who identifies the community stakeholders? Do we run the risk when we annually do this that we decide who the stakeholders are, or people simply come forward because they submit names? We consult with this group of stakeholders, and later on somebody says, excuse me, but your stakeholders don't represent the town of Groton. Your decisions are not representative of the town of Groton. So what was the use in having that? It's an example of a wonderful idea that I think would be very hard to put into practice. So I have some issues with it. I really would like to see tightened up. Again, either a slimmed down RTM, or if it's going to be a Board of Finance, at least have it representative. As far as the referendum, we could talk about the referendum later, but I know it's all part of the same nut. If you want, I can skip till later.
I would say let's tackle the RTM
First.
Board of Finance first, and then we can
Okay.
tackle the referendum. Karen?
Okay, I supported the idea of eliminating the RTM and going with the Board of Finance. Having served on the RTM, I know that, at least in my opinion, it did not always function as it was intended. So I would support the Board of Finance. I initially supported the idea that the members would be chosen at large, but I could also support, and I respect those who feel that it should be representative. I guess my concern with making it representative is, if somebody's going to be appointed to the Board of Finance, I would expect as a taxpayer that the individual serving in that capacity is qualified to do so, has a financial background, an accounting background, a budgeting background, some basis that gives them experience to serve in that capacity. And I think that once you start dividing those 7 positions up into districts, you're going to run a risk of having a district where you cannot find a single qualified person who is willing or able to serve in that capacity. So I think there would have to be, if you were going to make it representative, there would have to be some sort of a mechanism where if the parties cannot find someone to serve from a district, then that district, that individual would be serving at large. I'm just trying to think out loud. In lieu of the Board of Finance, I also would have supported a much smaller RTM. I think the biggest problem with the RTM is that at any given meeting, half the members are there at best. I can remember serving when there were times where we weren't sure if we would get a quorum. So I think if you had a smaller RTM, cut it in half, make it 20, a size or whatever you need, but a much smaller RTM, then you would have people running for the RTM who are truly committed and dedicated, and you wouldn't be running candidates who are simply filling seats on the ballot. So that would be my recommendations.
Thank you. Deb, then Greg?
Did you have your hand up first?
Doesn't matter to me.
So, my first question is, my honest opinion is I'm not really sure what's broken about our form of government right now, town manager, town council, RTM. We have a manager who manages the town with consultation from us. We look at the budget. We make our best decisions based on a town council. And then we submit it to the RTM, who as a fiduciary body tells us as a council whether or not they like what we chose to do. And they're the ones that decide whether we have the money to spend on it. So for me personally, I'm still not sold on what is broke with this system. Based on the public hearing comments, if the form of government changes, there has to be some kind of representation from all over the town. If it's one person each, two person each, the minority representation is just not existent in the proposed draft. What trickles down into the proposed draft that I feel uncomfortable with the most is when you start reading through and you start writing things down as far as how long of a time frame any of those components of individuals have to turn around and make a logical, true-based financial decision on what kind of budget is going to go through the town. There's definitely some gaps in the timeline, or my personal opinion is that there is just not enough time for the body that has been given that week or 2 weeks, however it falls into place, enough time to really make the right choices.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I would support the replacing the RTM with the Board of Finance, but also think that we do need district representation in the Board of Finance, so that we have equal representation. And I think it's tied directly to the referendum. You know, I won't speak on the referendum, but I think that's coupled with a referendum if you select that option. So I would support that. And if we did get to a smaller RTM, I think then you would not have a referendum. But I do support the Board of Finance.
Bonnie?
So I think that the Charter Revision Commission is not replacing the RTM with the Board of Finance. They're replacing the RTM with the budget referendum so that all the people in the town are represented. Everyone has the opportunity to vote. And so even though we are talking about having representation in each district, we're giving every district a vote with the referendum.
So I'll just say hopefully maybe the final word in the RTM. Really, when it comes down to it, want what's best for the town, like what serves the town the best. It's not about what serves me the best, although I'm a taxpayer. It's about what's best for the town. And you look how the town has operated for since 1955 or whatever it is with an RTM. So I understand people looking at it and wanting to figure out, does the RTM work well? I'm not going to, I don't feel it's my place to criticize it either way. I think that, there's some years where I love what they do, and there's other years where I'm disappointed in what they do, but that's the way it goes. People have mentioned that you can, If you don't like what your RTM member is doing, you can vote them out and move on. So as far as an RTM goes versus a Board of Finance, I want to make sure that ultimately, although what gets put forth in the charter may not be something I agree with, I want to make sure that it's cohesive and it makes sense and there's no loopholes, and that it's fair for everybody in town, for all corners of the town. And so when we're looking at the Board of Finance, like those people who spoke about making sure it was representative of the town, I agree with that. So as far as the RTM goes, I would like the Charter Revision Commission to look at the Board of Finance and look at having it have equal representation throughout the whole town, but also look at or come back with or have a discussion about the RTM, its size, and whether a reduced size might take care of whatever issue, because I think it was Councilor Perizzotti who asked, exactly what was broken with the current system. Like, what's the commission trying to fix by having a Board of Finance? So, the way I see it, there's choice A, where there's a Board of Finance, a referendum and equal representation or minority representation on the town. And there's B, a smaller RTM, no Board of Finance, referendum's up for discussion, but I wouldn't have an RTM and a referendum. I think one of the challenges is, like kind of what Harry said, that we're a diverse community, and to pull it into a body of 7 is hard to represent that diversity. So it can be done. I'm not saying it can, I'm just saying I'm questioning how effective it would be. So, people would agree that there's a number of people on the council who agree with the Board of Finance and getting rid of the RTM, or at least exploring it further. But if that is done, it sounds, one of the things that seems like a must is that it has to have equal representation, but also to have a look at a smaller RTM. Would everyone agree with that? Harry?
You need to think about the minority representation though too. That's very important.
Right, so if Board of Finance is created, the council would have minority representation. So there would be, there would be a minimum of 3 of one party, I believe, is how it would go on the council. So, all right, want to just go to the budget referendum? Okay, anybody want to start off, or Greg?
Well, I think it's tied to what we just talked about. If you go to a Board of Finance, the referendum would replace the RTM. So I think that's tied together. And then if we look at that other option with a smaller RTM, that you would not need a referendum.
Rich, did you want to say something?
Yeah, on the referendum, I agree that the annual budget referendum shall be bifurcated, and that the town and the BOE budget shall be voted on separately. I think that's an important issue, because one doesn't affect the other if there's a problem with one area. And then the other thing is, I don't agree with the fact that in the charter that they propose that there's no minimum voter turnout. I think there should be a minimum voter turnout on the referendum. Whatever percent somebody comes up with, I think that should be looked at and submitted to the committee, because you could have 2 people showing up, and I don't think that's correct. Other than that, I'm for it.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I support the idea of a referendum, but I initially always felt that there should be a trigger, that it should be tied to, if the budget exceeds a certain percentage increase. But I realize that there's a problem with, are we going to say an increase in the overall budget or an increase in the mill rate, or how is that going to be calculated? So I think the easiest thing to do, just to make sure that the referendum is truly representative, is to tie it to a minimum turnout. So I support Councilor Morasik's suggestion on that respect.
The idea of a referendum, like the idea of the RTM, is far rosier on paper than it is in practice. And again, I'm going to preface my remarks by saying I think we all understand none of these combinations of devices is perfect. The grass looks greener on the other side, always. And maybe it's kind of like hairstyles. You know, we'll adopt this, and in 10 years we'll adopt something else, and because you always want to change. But as far as the merits of the referendum itself go, I agree with the dissenters who drafted the minority report. I do think that the process would have a tendency, or there's a great risk, that you'll wind up with a much more political process rather than a deliberative process. Yes, the referendum is an opportunity for the voters to turn out. But consider, in the odd years when we have town elections, like this year, for example, what's been our turnout for that? Now, are you going to have a greater turnout in a May referendum? I doubt it. I wish more people would turn out, but they won't. I think there might be a tendency for a referendum, an annual referendum, to do one of a couple of things, actually a couple of things. One, not be as representative, nearly as representative as people would hope, with respect to the voice of the people, be the voice of some people. The people that actually bother to come out to vote. And you know what, if you don't want to come out to vote, what can I tell you? But come out to vote. That's all I can say on that one. So I think it's going to be not necessarily representative of the people, be representative of the people that come out. You might also very well create long-standing PACs. For example, imagine a PAC created, because what does a PAC do? PAC speaks not to the officials, a PAC speaks to voters. And if you know that a matter like a budget, school budget, town budget, but take the school budget, falls into the voters' laps every year, every May, it would be worth the time and the trouble for concerned teachers and parents, whatever you want to call the PAC, or concerned taxpayers, whoever they are, to form and stay formed on a year-to-year basis, and they could begin to drive the decisions in May. And also, they become standing organizations that people running for office are going to have to pay tribute to, so to speak, to get their support. Wouldn't it be nice to be recommended by such and such a PAC, you know? It happens now at state level. We've been mercifully free of this at the local level. So that's my concern with a referendum. I worry about the time. For example, we keep getting referenda. Now, we're told that most of the time there'll be one referendum. It's probably the case. But there'll also be years, and we'll only be living that year, not the prior years, which were all great and we only had one referendum. We'll be agonizing over the year that we had 3 or 4 referenda because we couldn't get our act together. The way I read the proposal, we're to have a referendum every couple of weeks. And these 2 weeks would include notification time, council rejiggering, recounts in the event of a close enough vote. But whatever, if there's no approval by June 30th, last year's budget is in effect until approved. But again, as I read this, we could still keep having referenda. And so as a practical matter, we could wind up like Griswold, for example, about 3 years ago, where their education budget failed on the 3rd referendum by 2 votes. I guess it kept failing. So they were hoping, as of the end of June newspaper report on the thing, they were hoping to get tax bills out in August. Now, whatever else our system does, whatever else our system produces, I haven't heard any complaints that the process, our process, has gotten derailed and led to failure to adopt a budget. Think of the state. Failure to adopt a budget. No matter what happens, we get the budget from the town manager, first draft. We work on it in April, the RTM works on it in May, we set the mill rate in early June, and we're done. Whether you like the product or not, we crank out a budget and we're able to actually finance town operations. We are never, as far as I know, in limbo on that one. So that's another major concern I have with a referendum, or if you keep having to have referendums. The other thing that I want to note is this. What happens if the voters say no on the Board of Education budget? The Board of Ed budget happens to be the exact same budget as last year's budget that they, or somebody else, said yes to. And let's assume, and I know the MBR, the minimum budget requirement, is a little more nuanced than this, but let's just say that that budget figure, being this last year's number, propagated this year, cannot be invaded. But the voters say no anyway. My understanding from the reading of the minutes is that the charter will have to lay down to state statutes. And I don't see that as a sufficient answer to what happens if the voters vote down a Board of Education budget that by state law actually can't go lower. The voters may want what they want, but by state law can't go lower. What happens then? And finally, I hope this is final anyway, the voters, looking at the budget on the ballot, do you like the budget, town budget, education budget, yes or no? And if no, it's too high or too low. We know what's going to happen there. What is the impulse? What's the instinct when people say I like or I don't like? They're looking at the size of the budget and they will draw the inference. This is higher than last year, or I don't like the number, meaning I'll pay more in taxes, or we will pay more in taxes. It's hardly ever, I'll venture to say, a purely academic exercise. That people simply don't like a budget figure because it offends them from a fiscal point of view. They're looking at their pocketbooks, which is what we're always trying to do. But could you not envision a scenario where the town budget, the town half of the budget actually goes up, but there's more funding from other sources? In other words, you could have a town budget that goes up a little bit, but really would result in fewer taxes, and vice versa with the Board of Ed budget. So people think they're voting down a higher budget, thinking they're saving taxes, when in fact their taxes weren't going to go up at all. In other words, they've proceeded on a false premise there. So I do trust the voters implicitly, but we're asking a lot of them for this one, the way that it's structured. Those are my concerns. I would prefer, if we did have a referendum, and I sent out a white paper on this one some years ago, that's frankly inspired by Massachusetts law with all its flaws. It's a Commonwealth law. Your local taxes can't go up more than 2.5%. Not the budget, not the mill rate. Your local taxes can't go up more than 2.5%. If they do, if the officials propose a hike more than 2.5%, goes to referendum. Let the taxpayers, the voters actually, decide what to do with that one. So that's that kind of a referendum I can think about. That's all I have to say on that one for now.
Deb?
So I'm not necessarily opposed to the referendum, but I have some very large concerns. I have three things. For all of us who have run in this room or sitting in front of TV watching this, we always look at election day and are like, how many people came out and voted this year? In some years, it's great. When you have a presidential election, you definitely have a larger group of people that get out there and vote. If we do go to a referendum, and by all right, I agree that everybody in the town, if you're paying taxes, you have the right to vote. I would disagree if there is not a minimum amount of people that need to show up to vote. I think that is critical. It would be such a shame to think that only 10% of how many ever registered voters came out and they determined the rest of our taxes. We sit up here, you sit out there on the RTM. We are elected to sit down and look at that budget as deeply and make the right choices. And I just don't know if your average person would actually sit down and do the work that we're elected to do. So that leaves me a little leery that you might not have enough turnout. And if you do have a turnout, can it be guided by, as someone mentioned earlier, a particular PAC that has an agenda and gets their group of people out? The second part is the potential cost. If you look at the timeline right now, this year alone, if we were to put this out to referendum, it's possible that we could have 5 before the end of June. At a minimum of, I think, $22,000 an election, you're looking at $110,000. How much are we truly saving? The third thing, and I brought this up in one of our original meetings, is the text. I still cannot understand and wrap my brain around the text. And this is, I will explain it again, my perception. When you go out there and you put a number down for the town and you put a number down for the Board of Education, what does that number necessarily represent? Does it represent your expenditures only? Because the town may bring in a different percentage of revenue towards their budget than the Board of Education brings in towards their budget. So for me, I really want to make sure that I understand what number are they really voting on? Are you if you have, here's the Board of Education budget and here's the town budget and these are what your expenditures are and this is what the Board of Education brings in for revenue and this is what the town brings in for revenue, because right now it's one pot. The town gives out the money to the Board of Education or your subdivisions or whenever it's time for them to do so, whether it's on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, I don't even know. It's not my business to know right this second. But my whole thing is, what is the number that they're truly voting on? And if they do vote on a Board of Education budget and they do vote on a town budget, how is that going to show up on your tax bill? Because now, if one entity brings in more revenue than the other, then you have a different bottom line. So you could be paying 6% in taxes towards the Board of Education, but only maybe 2% towards the town. You have to make sure people understand what they're voting on. And for some of us who sit here and do this all the time, we have a little bit more understanding how that works, but your average person just sees a dollar amount. And I want to make sure that that dollar amount that's on the referendum is clear, that they truly understand what they're voting on, because the way that we bring in revenue into this town does not necessarily equal Board of Education and town. So I'm a little confused as to what those numbers are by separating them versus putting one number out there and voting on the one number.
Diane? And then
Yes.
Mary. And then Bonnie.
I totally lost my train of thought. I think all the turnout figures have been addressed by the CRC. I don't think I have a problem with a certain percentage having to vote for the budget. I am totally for the budget. I have been for quite some time. I think as being a town council, Debbie is right that we go through it line by line, but I also believe, being a town councilor, it's our job to educate as best we can the residents on what we're spending on and to get the word out, to ensure we do get the residents out there. So I believe that's our job. When it comes to the BOE budget, I wonder if it would be possible that if, but for any reason that their budget gets voted down, that it would just go back to last year's. It would just be a trigger and go back to last year's. When it comes to the cost of the referendum, I think it's worth it because I think the residents should have the right to vote for where their money is going. I think it's scare tactics saying that, well, if we have 5 referendums, you know, that's going to cost upwards of $100,000. I think the CRC did a great job in clarifying that that almost never happens. So that's it. I am for it.
Harry?
Yeah, I'll just say I'm not a fan of referendums. And I agree with Councilor Perizzotti in the first topic we talked about, that I'm not sure our system of government is broken. However, I did say that maybe the RTM ought to be smaller for reasons I cited earlier. But the other side of it is, I know that, you know, majority rules and referendum may end up being part of this package, and it may happen. But I don't think it can be RTM and referendum. I think that has been said by Councilor Nault earlier. I got to talk about the diverse community again, because I talked about that in district representation, and you run the risk of the same thing happening here. If you don't have some sort of trigger or a petition or something that forces a referendum, and then you don't have any voter requirement of turnout, you run the risk of the stakeholders only coming out and voting on a referendum, and one or two parts of town basically running the show again. I think that's about all I have to say. So the diverse community thing is very important. We are more diverse than any other town in the state of Connecticut. I mean, just look at the different parts of town, and it's very important that everybody have a say in what happens in our town.
Bonnie?
That's exactly why I support a referendum. Everybody gets to vote. And as far as the cost, I disagree with Councilor Perizzotti, because that 22,000 is if all voting districts, all districts, 7 voting districts are used, and you wouldn't have to use, we could have it at the library and the senior center, and I think that just like Diane said, that the Charter Revision Commission made it very clear that the odds of having 5 referendums is very unlikely. I think that the way they've structured it, like Councilor Barber said, for us to educate the public, they're going to have public hearings, we're going to tell them what's going on. I respect the citizens of this town. I don't think they are ignorant. I think they're very smart. They follow the issues. They watch us on TV, and I think they're going to come out. Or they'll listen on TV, and then they'll come out. And I think it's going to be a very positive thing for the town.
Rich?
Yeah, I agree. We are a very diverse town, and you know, with the 7 fire districts, the 2 subdivisions, and the Home Association of Mumford Cove, it causes a lot of diversity. And if you look at the history of each one of those districts, you understand what Councilman Watson is talking about when he talks about the diversity. We're going into an area where it's uncertain, and there's a lot of anxiety that everybody seems to have about this, and because it's change, and this is normal when we're ready to change for something. But I think Councilor Barber said the right thing. We have to educate the people. The very first time, should this charter revision be accepted, we need to, as a council and as the town manager and the town clerk, educate the people. Maybe above and beyond what we would normally do in the following years. But the first year, we really have to make an effort to do that. And I think that would help get the people out, make them understand that it's their town and they need to be part of it, and the diversity that they have, they'll bring to the voting booths and vote accordingly. And I think that you know, that's what we got to do.
Dean?
One point I forgot to make earlier. The process now takes us to the end of May, and then we set the mill rate at the beginning of June, basically on what the RTM gives us. The proposed process, the officials end at the end of April, and then in May we go to referendum. What's the difference? The difference is this: we scan the horizon every year. What's coming from Hartford, and really every other year, because if Hartford adopts a biennial budget, it's really kind of a question every other year. But we scan the horizon. What do the grants from the state or the feds look like? Usually it's the state that we're watching. This is a pretty exceptional year. We still don't have a budget. I'm sure we're the last state to have one. But we need the time. We typically need the time to know what our revenues are going to be. And I'd say we know more at the end of May than we know or slightly at the beginning of June, than we know at the end of April. And this process shortens. It goes right into the arena, third week of May, and I think that's a problem. We need all the time we can get to figure out what's coming down the pike from the state, because they don't tell us in January or February or March or frankly even April. so,
Or October.
yeah.
Karen?
Yes, I'll tag on to what Councilor Antipas said. I'm very concerned about the timeline that's laid out in the proposed draft here. Having done probably 25 or 30 municipal budgets over my career, the timeline is way too compressed. It does not allow adequate time. I don't know if there was a clear understanding or not of the process involved and everything. I would urge, at the very least, I would urge the Charter Revision Commission to sit down with the finance director and just get a really good understanding of what has to happen from beginning to end, because I've looked at the timeline and I know just from practical experience, it's too compressed. There is not enough time to allow for the things that need to be done, because there are new things that the charter requires be done rather than just putting the budget together. So.
Thanks. So it looks like, from the referendum standpoint, if you decided to propose getting rid of the RTM and having a Board of Finance and put in a referendum, that the referendum, there's been a little bit back and forth about a trigger. I'd like to see a trigger, just so that we don't, there's a point that triggers it up. I'd also like to see, and it sounds like the other councils have said that they would like a minimum turnout. And I'd like to add that if the minimum turnout isn't reached, the budget passes. As far as the referendum goes, I'm wondering if we can explore the accompanying text. So kind of what Councilor Perizzotti was talking about, where it's not just a number, it has some kind of explanation to it, because it is a little bit confusing. I think it will be confusing. Are you talking about a 2% increase, let's just say, in spending? Which doesn't directly, because if spending, this year and last year, spending is down 1.8 and 5.5%, but the mill rate went up because the revenues are down. So if you're putting it together as a whole, I think it just needs to be understood. And the increase percentage, are we talking about, is it the mill rate that's ultimately going to increase? And that's what the trigger is, or what people are voting on? Or is it the expenditures for the Board of Ed and for the town? So I think there needs to be some clarification there. And then to what Councilor Antipas was saying, the whole calendar, and I think we had this as one of our items, is the budget calendar and procedure. I think it needs to be spelled out more clearly, and how, and all the dates, so that there's a better understanding to, that I think some people who spoke last week were concerned about how the calendar went, and it had it wasn't a start to finish cohesive thing. There were some gray areas. So if there was some kind of flow chart, I think there was a flow chart, but like a even more in-depth flow chart for every what if. Will we get to 5 votes? Someone said highly unlikely, but we're going to have that once in the millennium storm. There's going to be that time when it's going to happen, and we're going to have to have an answer to it. So I think that, anybody have any other comments about, yep, Bonnie?
I don't think there should be a trigger. I don't think there should be a minimum turnout, but I could live with a minimum turnout, as long as it's not excessive. I think we get, 20% turnout? It needs to be less than what a general election is. Something reasonable, like 10% or something.
Yeah, I think there should be one or the other, and I'd be in favor of the minimum turnout by the trigger. But
I
I
would
think we
agree.
need I think we need something there.
So we're not saying, they're saying don't worry about the trigger, focus more on the minimum budget, minimum turnout. So, okay, okay, no, that's, yeah. You want to clarify?
Yeah, I think there should be a trigger
And a minimum,
and a minimum turnout requirement.
okay. Very good. How about council 2-year to 4-year terms and staggered? Bonnie?
I originally I didn't have any objection to what they proposed, but as I was thinking about it, I don't really agree with the staggered terms. I think it's going to be too complicated, and I think if the town is fed up, they should be able to totally change the whole council out. And so for that reason, I don't like the staggered terms. And I thought, because it is a learning curve when you get on the council, that the 4-year term made sense, but I think it's too long for the same group to be running the town. I think that 2 years is fine, and given the town, the people in the town, the ability to change us, they're mad with what we're doing, they can vote us all out.
Does anybody disagree with that? Dean?
As I understand the back and forth at the commission, the pros, those in favor, were in favor of the 4-year terms because of the time needed for learning and basically making it through a 4-year term so that you're at peak effectiveness, for example. The other thought was that people would, with a 4-year term, you would be less likely to focus on the next election. You would think more long-term. And as a general principle, that's fine. I'm not going to say that there have never been counselors on this council in its long history who haven't thought purely political thoughts. But I'll say it. I mean, I'm a party chair. I wish they would think politically. I wish they would think about the next election, and they don't. So I think that hazard is just not there. If anything, they do what they're elected to do. This council, the prior council too, and the council before that one, almost all. Like I said, there have been political characters that have run through this room, but there really is an incredible focus. We don't get paid for this, as you know. We don't get paid for this. We don't get benefits, stipends, retirement, nothing. And I'm not, putting a halo on. But there's nothing. If I win an election, great.
Why isn't that in here?
If I lose an election, it'll stink because of the time that I put into it. But I get over it. There's no real loss to me. So we're not actually focused on the election the way people might think. So that hazard, I think, is not really there. A 4-year term is an interesting I'm of two minds on the 2 and a 4 thing. There was one of the cons was if you made it a 4-year term, you're less likely to attract candidates. People will not want to put in the 4-year commitment. I'm almost in favor of going to a 4-year term and trying it and seeing it. It is a problem sometimes. We happen to have full slates on both parties this year, but that's an exception. I'd be in favor of going with a 4. The staggered poses issues with respect to minority representation. I know it's done it's done with Board of Ed. Frankly, it generates confusion. And are we going to wind up with a candidate that runs and then is told, I'm sorry, you won, but you don't actually get to take your seat because there's too many of you in your party. So, yeah, that's my. Those are my thoughts on that
Diane?
I understand why you put the staggered in. When I was new, and quite a few of us were new 2 years ago, we were like a deer in headlights, and it is a learning curve. I don't really have an opinion on that, whether that goes or not. The 4-year term, I have to agree with it. It is a learning curve that takes you many months, not only on what's going on, but how the meetings are actually run. So it does take a long time to learn. The other thing is that was a rude awakening for me is that things do not get done overnight. Everything takes another meeting, and another meeting, and my eyes are wide open to that because I'm the type that once I make a decision, let's go. All right, next subject. So it does take time, and the one reason I am running again is because I feel like I haven't finished. I feel like in 4 years, maybe I'll actually get something done when I'm sitting on the council. So I do agree with the 4-year term. Thanks.
Thanks. Harry and then Karen.
Yeah.
And then Rich.
I've run for town council 14 times.
Don't
And I lost the very first one. I don't have a problem running every 2 years. It's kind of, although I have to say that I get a little jealous over my wife. She's on the Board of Ed, and she doesn't have to run this time because she got elected for 4 years. But I don't have a problem with the 2-year term. It'll end up being wherever you guys propose, but I'm just saying my opinion. I don't have a problem with it. That leads me to term limits. Why would you take from the voters their option of re-electing somebody just because you don't want them to run for office again? And I feel very strong about it. If you elect people every 2 years, every 4 years, it doesn't matter. Why not let them run again? Why have term limits? If they're not doing their job, the majority of the voters are going to say, no, we don't want you in office again. The only thing I'd say about that is, I'll make an analogy. People don't get fired from their job because their boss thinks they're doing well. Doesn't happen. So why would you take the option of having somebody that wants to continue to serve our community and run for office again? Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Karen?
Yes, I support the 4 years. I think running every 2 years, it's a lot of work. Takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. It's expensive. I mean, it can cost a lot of money. And I just think that, I feel personally that it takes a while, even when you come in and you've been on the council before, it takes a while for a council to get its momentum going, to set its goals, to start moving forward. But once you do, it seems like with the 2-year term, you just, before you know it, you're into budget. That takes up a good amount of the council's time, almost to the exclusion of virtually everything else. And then before you know it, your term is over, and you feel like you're just gotten your momentum going, and it's over. So I would like to see the terms be 4 years rather than 2, and I do not like the staggered. I think, I do like the idea, as one person at the hearing said, the option of being able to clean house. Maybe instead of doing it every 2, you can do it every 4, but I like the idea that the entire council as a body can be replaced if our taxpayers don't feel we're doing a good job.
Thank you. Rich?
Thank you. I support the 4 years terms. A couple of years ago, I had a number of issues that or goals that we had set, and then all of a sudden, you kind of, the governor says something, and a whole bunch of people are voted out, and therefore a lot of these goals that were set are kind of put on the back burner, and and I'd like to see some of them continue, and I think with a 4-year term, you could follow through with these. I'm still after getting the town to look at Fitch Middle School as a core area for all of the office spaces. And we brought that up very early 4 years ago. And right now, it's kind of like on the back burner. And there's a couple other issues that we brought up back a couple of years ago that kind of fell through. The charter revision for, excuse me, not the Code of Ethics. We were talking about that because that was in the original 2009 charter. I think they took it out now. So I support the 4-year term. As far as staggered goes, I can't see that to be a big issue. I do agree that if you're not doing your job and you don't have the influence from Hartford or from Washington, and the people truly don't like you, then they should vote you out after the 4 years. And I think that the 4 years would be a welcome thing for the new candidates that come in. Most of us have been here for more than 4 years. So getting a candidate to serve 4 years is not a difficult thing, contrary to what I heard tonight. I look around, and I think there's just a few of us that might not have served more than 4 years, but quite a few of you did.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I agree with not having the staggered limits, just because I think, again, it's going to create difficulty with the minority representation of the town council and just make it too hard to understand. And I believe 2 years is sufficient. I know there's lots of folks that have been around for more than 2 years, but I think to get new blood into the system, you may be harder to find people that want to sign up right away for 4 years, vice 2 years, so.
Thank you. So it sounds like it can go either way. For me, it's not a deal breaker either way, but it sounds like there's more people who prefer not staggered, but that's, again, up to you guys. Employees of the town and Board of Ed cannot serve on council or Board of Ed, and I just want to ask, because Mike is here. I knew it was Carrie, but I couldn't think of the first name. Mike, I think you wrote in one of the things that it's already covered by state statute.
Yeah, that was one of Eileen's comments, Town's Labor Council, and the BOE, there's actually different statutes for the town employees and the BOE employees, but our comments
Yeah.
set out what the situation is.
Okay, and so one of the things also is that I think the council would like the charter revision to do is, I think you're going to be given a copy of or you have it to the commission and the comments by the attorneys to at least address some of those things. Anybody else have any more comments? Bonnie?
Yeah. So I feel really strongly that something needs to be added in, because I think the statute's going to allow town and Board of Ed employees to serve. I think it's discriminatory. I'm not really sure what the details in the law are, but the attorneys are saying that they are allowed to be on it. They have to have stringent rules that they recuse themselves if they have a conflict of interest. There's people that are sitting in the RTM voting on a budget for their own department, and they are not recusing themselves, and it's absolutely wrong.
Anybody else?
Dean?
Yeah, I think this was brought up the last time, that the Hatch Act, the Federal Hatch Act. I got curious about it, so I wanted to look something up, and there's a very nice presentation made to the New York State Bar Association on this some years ago. And the Hatch Act came in 1939 and was really meant to codify practices, rules that were in place from the 1800s about federal employees engaging in political activities. So you'd think it would just be confined to federal employees. But it also filters down to state and municipal employees if you're getting federal money for anything. So, what I got was this: if you have to determine whether you're subject to the Hatch Act, and a municipal employee must assess whether he or she performs duties in connection with a program financed by federal monies. There's a number of our programs that have some federal money in them. Okay. So, doesn't matter whether the employee receives a salary from non-federal monies or has no authority and discretion. It's sufficient that they, that they're part of that program, affiliated with that program. Once the municipal officer or employee determines that he or she is subject to the Hatch Act, he or she must know what political activities the Hatch Act prohibits. And one of them is running as a candidate for public office in a partisan election. That is an election in which any candidate represents, for example, the Democratic or Republican Party. I found that striking. Do you know anything about that, Mike?
No, I haven't looked at the Hatch Act in decades.
Okay.
Sorry.
I know about it.
Dean, are you for or against?
Are you? That's not a fair question.
That's what we're trying to figure out.
Well, the first question is it legal to prevent people from holding the office? May somebody in a position of an employee, for example, hold an office with that's the first question. And if they're allowed, and it's still considered unseemly for them to be voting on what people think of as basically their paycheck, although it can get a little blurry, then I'm in favor of them recusing themselves. I think they should be doing that. I think that's, if they're voting in their own self-interest, that's a conflict, I believe, already under the charter.
Do we leave the recusing up to in terms of the RTM, like the moderator and the town clerk, and here you know, Nikki or me or the town manager, I think that, yeah, I guess it would be the mayor, but, you know, to have that knowledge and to be able to, you know, put a foot down and say you need to recuse yourself, or do you leave it in their hands, and if they don't, it just moves forward? Because does that have to be part of the, you know, does that have to be part of the charter? Because I think there's instances where, even on this council, where there are things going on in different boroughs or different subdivisions, and they're affecting the taxpayers and affecting the people on the council, but they don't. You know, where is that? How do you hold that accountable? That's my
I
question.
think it depends on how big the group is. If I'm, let's say, employed by the Board of Education, I'm employed by the town, and I'm there as a counselor or as an RTM member, and I'm there and I vote on something that's really specific, and if I don't vote in favor of it, I'm actually slitting my own fiscal throat. That's one thing I've got to, you can imagine scenarios where I'm voting directly on something that's connected to me. But if I'm voting on the overall budget, if I work for the Board of Education, for example, and I vote on the education budget, is that a more tenuous connection? Must I recuse myself? I should identify myself as an employee of the Board of Education. But must I recuse myself if I'm voting outside my actual specific interest? I'm a taxpayer and I vote on the taxes. But that's okay, because there's a lot of taxpayers. And by the way, voters and taxpayers are not the same group. Voters include taxpayers, but not always taxpayers.
I mean, I think a lot of people spoke, both in writing and at the public hearing about, a few people did actually, about these employees. And, you know, I look to Mike and the attorney to tell us, because we're not reinventing the wheel. I mean, aren't there other communities and a lot of these things that are faced with the same situations? And
Yes, other communities are. We wrote it, we dealt, time flies anymore, 7, 8, 9 years ago with another town we represent where a counselor, I believe, was working for the BOE, a town counselor. But I was going back through the comments we gave you on these items, and Eileen gave pretty clear guidance, I think, on the BOF section, which is in section 4. I think the charter would have to say that the BOE employees could be on the BOF. But again, I defer to what she wrote.
okay. Greg?
Well, I think we should note that the Charter Revision Commission purposely didn't consult with the lawyer on everything, so this is the first time that they're getting feedback from the lawyer. They did that so, you know, to reduce the cost as much as possible, so they're going to go back and look at some of those things.
It's a great point, Greg. Thank you. Harry?
Now, just every time we talk about the Board of Education budget in our town, when it comes to us, I always make the statement that I substitute teach. Certainly, if there was something in the budget that I was to vote on, a raise for substitute teachers, I mean, I would recuse myself, I guess is the right term. But I always stayed up front. You know, I do a little work for the Board of Education. I make a whole $90 a day, probably for 20 days a year, and work pretty hard. So I don't know, where do you draw the line? Does somebody, you know, that might do some kind of consulting for somebody? If you're going to vote on something to fund yourself, or you're going to gain from it, I could see that. But I mean, we have a hard enough time finding people to run for office anyways. You know, this is going to cut the field even more. I don't feel guilty at all about working for the Board of Education 20 days a year or whatever I do, and doing what I do up here in the council. So I would, and it sounds like it might not be legal anyway, so I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to keep throwing them out there. Council shall issue an annual town report. Karen?
I am totally against that. I think the annual report should be issued by the town manager. I think putting it as the responsibility of the town council is absurd. I can't think of any other word. You know, we have a professional town manager whose job it is to run the town for us. He's intimately familiar, or will be, with everything, every facet of town operations, and I think he's the wealth of knowledge. I mean, that's why we hire the right person and put him into the job. So then to turn around and say that the council is responsible for producing the annual town report doesn't make any sense.
I just
Bonnie?
completely, 100% agree with Councilor Morton.
Thank you. Dean, and then Diane.
I think even if it becomes the council's responsibility, whoever the council is, we're probably going to, as a practical matter, send it over to the administration anyway for preparation, and then we'll review it. So I'm not sure what effect that's going to have, because none of
So
us.
there's a around.
Yeah.
I agree, I'm against it. I believe we have a paid employee in the town manager to do it, and he's got his expertise.
Harry?
I think there actually might be a state statute that the town is supposed to write an annual report of some sort every year. And Jane, you'll remember, you're sitting back there, how much, the town manager used to do. I have a whole bunch of them. They go all the way up till 2003 or 4, and they're maybe 20 or 25 pages long, and they have pictures of the town council, and, and there might be some stories in there about Esker Point Beach or how nice our library is. But the bottom line is we get weekly status reports. The town manager gives us reports. All that stuff's available to anybody that wants them. I don't think, certainly the town council shouldn't do that. I mean, it's our responsibility, and the mayor spoke about it earlier, maybe having Gary Snyder come in and talk about how they did in their department. Those things are televised. People can watch those things. If you really want to see something that gives you a snapshot, at least on the financial side in this town and what's going on for economic development or whatever is, when our bond agencies come to town, there's a pretty extensive financial document that's put out. I'm sure that's FOI, Ebola, or whatever. John, I don't know if you've seen that just recently. You've spoken to Moody's, maybe?
Yeah, and they were concerned with the state budget, and is it going to affect our...
But the
our ability to
document
pay?
that our finance department puts out is
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, it's very detailed.
If somebody wants to see something as far as the annual report, how we're doing, just look at a couple of those. So, stop. Thank you.
All right. I think that's I think it was,
Richard.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, Rich.
I agree that the council shouldn't write the report. The council should be authorized to have the town manager write the report and make sure that it does happen.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I agree also. I think we've covered a lot of the big ticket items. I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about or provide feedback at the next meeting. I don't know if we want to ask for consensus on some of the remaining items, but just a thought.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that we're trying to do that, but everyone is, if we throw something out and somebody states what it is and we all agree, we can just move on and we can just say, yeah, we're with you. That what you're getting to?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to an ethics commission, I think it's written twice in the document. It's in 3 dot something, and then it's also in 5.3.
3.5.3
And 5.3. I think I think that leaving it in from the last charter is okay, but let's leave it in one place. Would everyone agree with that?
Yes.
Yes.
I do have a question. There was the requirement that the council adopt an ordinance was struck. That's the proposed change. And I have heard, although I did not read that in the discussion, but I have heard from other people that just form the commission, and the commission will write the code. I don't know whether that was the impetus behind striking out the adoption of the ordinance in the text. If that is the reason for striking that out, the commission would have to look at whether that it's legal, because I don't think that an ethics commission formed by a town, which we're allowed to do by state law, has the authority to adopt an ordinance. I think that adopting an ordinance remains with the town council to do. So if you eliminate it, we can still adopt the ordinance, we can, and all of that. I just curious to know what the thinking was behind striking that out. Was there a feeling that an ethics commission will write its own ethics code?
Thank you. Rich?
I've got an issue on the voting rights of the non-resident citizens.
Okay.
This was brought up back in the previous charter where a number of residents that pay over $1,000 in taxes were eliminated from voting on budget-type referendums. And at that time, there was something like 400 to 800 non-residents, and their average property of those people were something like $5,000 to $40,000 per year in taxes, and they were denied a vote on financial referendums. I think that the charter revision should comply with the CSG Section 7-6, eligibility to vote. And at any town meeting other than a regular meeting and so forth, I don't want to quote the thing, but whatever it requires for us to have, if it's a town meeting, we should comply with the state statute and allow the non-resident people to vote. And I think that that's a very important issue. A lot of people brought that up. I received emails from it. I spoke to a number of people about this, and they want to vote. Unfortunately, back in 2003, a group of people in one of the subdivisions ganged up on the town, so I understand, and sent out absentee ballots and caused a change in the votes on that issue. And I think that was the reason why it was put on the charter revision back in 2009. When I was on that commission, I thought that it was going to go to the town council for a vote, but I didn't understand that it was just a sly of a change of a word, elector and resident. And it was kind of done sneaky, in my opinion. So I'd like to unravel that problem and have the charter revision comply with CSG Section 7-6.
Anybody else with this? Dean?
I think the question, I don't know where Connecticut sits with the other states. I think a lot of other states don't provide any voting rights to non-resident taxpayers at all. I know Mass doesn't, New York doesn't, for example. So it's nice that the state allows an avenue for this. Now, the question isn't so much what the people want. I'm in favor of it as well, if it's legal. And I've said this to a number of people. If I know that it is actually the way we're going to structure the town government, if we actually don't meet the requirement, the state doesn't require that we allow it. It allows us to do it under certain conditions. If the state does not allow us, under our circumstances, whatever those are, to offer these rights to the non-resident taxpayers, I could not go with a provision in the charter that trounces that, because I know that I'm flouting state law. And for people who say, well, try it anyway because no one's going to challenge you in court, imagine a referendum passing or failing, and the losing side saying, excuse me, but it was heavily weighted by non-resident taxpayers, and I think they're not allowed to actually vote under the law, the charter, and all that. I'm taking this one to court. We're going to wind up with a referendum that's nullified. We'll have egg on our faces, whoever the we is. So if it's cloudy, I'm in favor of having it in there, sort of trying it out, but I still run the same risk. But if I know that it's not legal, no matter what I want, if I know that it's not legal, I couldn't, in good conscience, support that. So I don't have an answer right now whether it is or it isn't legal, but it isn't up to me to decide that.
Diane?
I don't understand why it was legal for many years and then now it's not legal. So somebody needs to explain that to me, why they could for many, many years and then all of a sudden they decided it wasn't legal a few years ago.
They can't.
So we had several legal opinions that we saw, and I think that the charter revision saw. One of the ones that I saw had said that you could turn a council meeting or some meeting into a town meeting and then have people vote, which I wouldn't be for personally. I think that people who pay taxes in the town should be able to vote. But I think that, just for me, I think that the ceiling or the $1,000 minimum is too low. I would make it, I would raise it higher, so that if you'd have to own more than a
Boat.
a dinghy in the town in order to vote. So I would be in favor and look at other communities as to what that threshold is. What would be a logical threshold? I
Mr.
would be
Mayor.
in favor of.
But it says in the charter, 1,000.
Yeah, but I wouldn't.
I mean, in the state statute.
Yeah, well, I don't like the state statute. So, yeah, go ahead, Frank.
Is it 1,000 in taxes, or is it 1,000
That's good value.
worth of
That's a good
property?
question.
For taxes assessed against him on an assessment of not less than $1,000 on the last completed grand list of such town.
So it's property worth $1,000?
That's
It's
right.
not paying $1,000
It's
in
property.
taxes?
John, did
Okay.
you want to?
I just, you know, maybe if we could have Mike just explain how this would work and
Go ahead, Mike.
what his thoughts are.
Thank you, John.
I don't care.
Now, let me try to briefly go through the history of this as I know it. I think that when the town first adopted the charter in 1957, it adopted a special act of the legislature as the charter. I think the language that at one time allowed non-resident taxpayers to vote on bond referenda was in the original special act that became the charter. In 2008, the Charter Revision Commission, moved to remove the word voters from the section of the charter that authorized non-resident taxpayers to vote on bond referendum. Now, even at that time, non-resident taxpayers were not allowed to vote on other referendum initiatives and referendum on legislative ordinances, but they were allowed to vote on bond referendum. After that word was taken out, we were asked to do an opinion. On August 25, 2009, I wrote an opinion indicating that the way we read the statutes and the charter, non-resident taxpayers could no longer vote on bond referendum. We weren't asked at that time whether that provision could be put back. This year we were asked whether that provision could be put back, and we said that we did not think it could be. And it appears that the town obtained an opinion from its bond counsel on this issue, and she concurred. 7-6, Councilor Moravchik has read to you, says that at a town meeting, electors and persons who don't reside in a town who own property of $1,000, a taxable value of $1,000, can participate in the town meetings. So I go to the Voluntown annual meeting every year for the last 18 or 19 years. Non-resident taxpayers can vote there at the town meeting per section 7-6. 7-6 applies to town meetings and generally applies in the smaller towns that have boards of selectmen and town meeting forms of government. We did not find any statutory authority that would directly authorize the town of Groton to reinsert the word voter or whatever other language would be necessary to give non-resident taxpayers the right to vote at the referendum being proposed in this charter revision. Now, our opinion is a legal opinion by us. We didn't find any legal authority to the town from the state to insert that kind of language in the charter. As Councilor Antipas just implied, that doesn't mean that a judge somewhere down the line might not disagree with us. But the consequences of putting that language in and being wrong could be catastrophic on an individual occasion. So that's my recollection of the history of it. There was some discussion, I think, in the bond council's opinion about having a dual legislative body for the town. Right now, you have a combination legislative body, which is the town council and the RTM. So I think the suggestion in the bond council's opinion was have a combination town council and town meeting. That is allowable under the statute of the Home Rule Act. You can do that. But I think when you go back, I was a year or so old in 1957, and I lived in Hartford. So I wasn't here when the charter was adopted. My guess is that the thought at that time must have been that the town had outgrown the Board of Selectmen town meeting form of government, but wanted to retain the vestiges of the town meeting. So they created our town. If you were to have a town meeting in the town of Groton now, I think Mr. Bird indicated you have about 30,000 people eligible to participate. So if you were going to have a real town meeting, you probably would have to rent the Mohegan Sun Arena or something along those lines. Now, I know Ledyard has a town meeting, but I think their population is half of yours.
Mike, can you, we received an email from somebody who said that in a recent informal random survey of other cities and towns in Connecticut that hold referenda, I found that all but one allow any non-resident taxpayer who owns property to vote. The grand list is used in most cases to document eligibility. Are you saying that all of those municipalities have them vote at a town meeting, not go to the polls and vote?
No, I don't know what those towns were. I did my own informal poll
Okay.
a few weeks ago when we were looking into these opinions, and went through several towns comparable size to Groton. And there are other towns that do allow non-resident taxpayers to vote in their referendum.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, it can't be denied. I do not know the circumstances of how those provisions came to be in their charters, whether it came from a special act, as Groton's did, or whether the town's attorney disagreed with us.
So are we bound by the Connecticut statutes? Like the town can't say, hey, we want everybody who has has a certain value of property to vote. We can't do that. It has to.
The issue is, you can't do anything. The town cannot do anything for which it has not been given authority by the state. We did not find any direct authority by the state to have a charter provision affecting the rights of persons of non-resident taxpayers to vote. We just didn't find it. There have been cases where one town had a charter provision by which its town officials could be recalled. This is about 1982, and the Supreme Court said that provision was not authorized by the state. So what I'm telling you is, we gave our opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Bond counsel gave her opinion.
Maybe when we have no budget from the state, we can do whatever we want in that period of time.
Well, we're on TV. The thought has occurred to me the next time if I ever get pulled over for speeding again, I'll ask why, when the legislature doesn't follow the law. But at any rate, be that as it may, I mean, I think what the most I can say on this is that we didn't find any direct authority on it. So our view was that it's not authorized. There is a statute in the there's a section of the Home Rule Act, 7-192A, I believe it is, no parentheses, that has prohibitions, things you absolutely can't do. And one of them is doing anything to affect the rights of electors, which are persons resident in the town, registered to vote. There is no similar express prohibition about dealing with non-resident taxpayers. So I guess what I'm saying is our opinions are what they are. They were written because we think they're right. But there are opinions, and they may not.
Okay.
Somebody with robes in Hartford might disagree with us eventually.
Yep. Greg?
So I think I heard most people in favor of allowing this to happen if we can make it happen. I mean, with day and age of electronics, could we not have a town meeting that's televised in different satellite locations where people can participate and actually have them vote in those locations?
Well, first of all, you wouldn't be having anyone vote at the town meeting. If you were to create a town meeting in the charter for this purpose, the town meeting would have a meeting that would immediately adjourn to the voting booths.
Right.
It wouldn't be a real town meeting. And in one of the opinions we've written on this, I think the most recent one, in September,
Okay.
we commented on the notion of a town meeting that isn't really a town meeting, where people can't even come to talk. And there is some case law on that that suggests that that is it's a non sequitur. A town meeting where people can't come, talk, and participate isn't a town meeting. But again, there's no case law on that either. So we're giving you our best estimate of what the law is. I will say, from having reviewed the history of the recent charter revisions, I think there was some serious discussion about this issue back in 08, 09. And memoranda were written and stuff by some of the counselors, I think. But there was a lot of discussion about it, I think, at the time. And it was obviously a pretty significant change from the charter that had been in place for 40-something years. And there are pros and cons, as you know. I don't need to tell you that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I think what we're going to try to do here is give each counselor a final, there's a ton more things to discuss, and I think that in the name of the time and the fact that we've given the Charter Revision Commission quite a bit of information already, that we'll give each counselor a opportunity to say whatever things they want to be looked at or what their opinion is, and try to move on from it. Mike?
I had one little note that I wanted to make that we didn't put into the comments. I would suggest that the commission consider adding something that would give the town the authority to redo its budget. Not at any time during the fiscal year, but if you have a situation like this year where you don't get the state budget,
Okay.
and it comes in less than what you anticipated when you've passed your budget, to provide for that. Now, that's another one. Whether there's authority for that, I don't know. The last 2 years ago, in the omnibus budget bill, about 3/4 of the way through, the legislature snuck in something that said the towns would have until, I think it was June 30th this year, to redo their budgets in the event that they got cut unexpectedly by the state. So the legislature thought that was necessary at that time, but I think it's something the commission should consider putting in the charter now, this time.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with Diane, because she needs to go leave and go to work, or get ready for work. So
Thank you. I want to thank you again for all your time. I know this was not easy, and please do not get discouraged that we are trying to tweak it here and there. We have been listening to the taxpayers and the residents when they see us in the supermarket or when they come to the meetings, and we just want, obviously, what is best for Groton, and I think you did a fabulous job. Thank you.
thanks, Diane. Dean, do you want to?
Am I limited to a particular topic? Sorry.
Open floor. But, 5 minutes or so would be good.
You know, I will say that I'm in agreement with Commissioner Granatowski on one thing. Note this in your calendar. The preamble, I have a problem with. You called it fluff, and that's exactly what it is. So, anyway, what hasn't been covered? What hasn't been covered? Oh, the issue of town clerk. I read what was in the minutes. I know it was voted down 9-1. Commissioner Dauphiné made a valiant effort. I'll say that I don't buy the arguments against an appointment of a town clerk. The arguments in favor of keeping it elected are that most towns do it. Okay, I didn't realize that was a popularity kind of a thing. Town clerk who's not influenced by the town manager may be important. If appointed, clerk will not be responsive to constituents. Elections are a way to correct the behavior of a clerk. Clerk should remain independent. Experience, and this I read once, experience, since they're not requiring experience for members of the Board of Finance, why require experience for a town clerk? I see the town clerk the way I would see the town assessor. We require certain minimum qualifications for the town assessor to perform his or her job. I don't know why we wouldn't want to do the same thing with a town clerk. It's a very technical kind of thing. I'm not sure what we're talking about when we're saying, responsive to constituents. I suppose if they have mean people behind the desk, that's an issue, but I haven't found that to be the case. So I think it should be an appointed position. I think the best qualified person should be appointed. And an election boils down to popularity contest, frankly, which is fine for us. But we don't do it with the assessor, and we don't do it with the, I don't think we should do it with the town clerk. So.
Thank you, Dean. Karen?
Once again, Counselor Antipas took exactly what the one issue I wanted to address was the change to make the town clerk an appointed position. I felt very strongly about that. I think that the individual in that office, I disagree that they don't have to be experienced. I think it's absolutely imperative that they be experienced. The town clerk's position is one of only 2 in municipal government that requires state certification. And the state provides the training specifically because of the type of duties. And my only other comment was there were some individuals at the hearings who basically took aim at the Charter Revision Commission as not being truly representative of the town and the taxpayers and the voters, and I took great exception to that because we worked very hard in formulating the makeup of the commission to ensure that we represented all of the areas of town and as many diverse interests as we could. And I would like to just use something out of a letter that Robert Frink, who was a member of the commission, sent to us, and he said, the bottom line, if you live in Groton, at least one of us was representing your point of view and doing it very well, and I couldn't agree more. I think you all did a fabulous job, and I hope you'll definitely go through the charter again. You need to take a hard look at the comments that were made by the town's attorney because some of those are really crucial. And there are a couple of areas where if for whatever reason you chose not to incorporate the town's attorney's comments, I would have to think about whether or not I could support it because I think that they would make the document flawed in my opinion. So I hope you will look at that very carefully. Thanks.
Thank you. Deb?
I completely agree also with the comments made by Councilor Moran and Antipas in regards to the town clerk. I won't elaborate. They've already said what I was going to say. But just my general philosophy moving forward after having this general discussion with us as counselors tonight, any deliberations moving forward, I hope you take into consideration all of the different things that we've thought of from a different perspective, being on the council. Some of the people at the public hearing who have also been in different positions, whether they were town employees, Board of Ed employees, citizens at large. I think there were some really good comments that actually opened my eyes a little bit to make me look a little bit further at some of the sections we discussed tonight. I know how hard you all have worked. It's very much appreciated that you took so much of your volunteer time also to try to put something together that's great for this town. With that being said, as an elected person for this town, I cannot and will not support a charter that does not truly benefit the best of all citizens in this town. Right now, I will be honest, if this comes back as is, I guarantee you I will not support it. There's still too many unanswered questions. There's still too many gaps in certain areas, and I just would not support it. That's why I hope you can really take a hard look at some of the suggestions that were put forward, and hopefully in the next few weeks, I look forward to seeing what you've come up with. So thank you.
Harry?
Yeah, most of the things that I said tonight, I've jotted down, and I'm going to hand this to Nikki, and it could get passed on to you. My opinion on a lot of things. I think appointing a town clerk, I'll just leave it at that. You guys have done a good job of that. I really appreciate the fact that all of you sat in a room. I read 275 pages of minutes, I think. Is that what it was? You all come from, I mean, this is Groton, I mean, you guys are Groton, you know, it's, well, I appreciate the fact that you all were able to sit in a room and act like adults and discuss all these things and come to conclusions by majority. We'll point out that the public hearing that we had, 28 people spoke, and 17 of them had objections to a lot of the things being proposed. I think most of them were pro RTM members themselves, formerly RTM members. There are some things that I think that are proposed in there that maybe shouldn't be in the charter. Some purchasing, some line item stuff. I'm not sure they belong in the charter. And I'll just make that general comment. Thank you for working for 15 months to give us what you've given us. And we'll get to the end of this at some point, so thank you.
Thanks. Greg?
Yeah, I also want to echo the sentiment. I believe the town clerk should be appointed. So I concur with the previous folks that spoke to that. And I too want to thank everybody for their hard work and the length of time and the amount of time they devoted to going through this process. I mean, it may sound like we're providing a lot of feedback, but I think they're just adjustments at the end of the day to things that, you know, the core things that you wrote. So I don't think it's a huge rewrite. So again, thank you for your work on this.
Thanks, Bonnie?
Yeah, thank you very much for all the work you did. I echo
Everybody's gratitude for what you've given to us. I like the thing that you ask us to set a prioritized set of goals. I do agree with your changes to appointing the town attorney. I agree with what everybody said about the appointment of the town clerk, but I would also be in favor of hiring her and having the town manager hire her or him. I think that my biggest thing is to get that, we've talked about it a lot tonight, the timeline, because we haven't gotten the budget info from the state yet. And, but clearly we were supposed to have it in June. If it happens the way it normally happens, the ideal process would be the state gives us a budget in January and then we start working on our budget. So I think given the fact that it doesn't happen that way, and Councilor Morton was pretty clear about working in town government, that you need to maybe look at how long it takes to do those things. Because I'm not that familiar with that, but I think we need to give the people who are going to work on this the right time. And other than that, I think most of your big suggestions, I completely agree with the referendum. And I applaud you for what you've come up with.
Rich?
I think the Charter Revision Commission did a wonderful job. They kind of highlighted a lot of the areas where that needed to be tweaked. And one of the areas on section 5.4, before the word manager, you should put the word town manager, just to make it clear. I agree with the change in section 8-2 about the town attorney, where we don't have to wait that 120 days, because that caused a couple of problems a number of years ago where we ran into a timeline on that. And as far as the amendment of the charter becoming effective 60 days after the passage of the electorate, I think we need an implementation plan of some sort. Maybe not to be put into the charter, but as a go-by, because there's certainly going to be some confusion once that happens, whether it be in May or whenever. And I think that would be important. Other than that, I think this is a wonderful charter, and I'm for all the issues that were presented, and I think it's important to bring this to the people. I read the minority report, which had a lot of good points in it, and I read the majority report, which had a lot of good points in it. And to sit here and judge whether or not we ought to continue or ought to take that thing apart, I think that's wrong. I think a lot of this has to go to the people. I've heard for years people wanted to vote on a referendum. I heard a lot of comments about the RTM and how sometimes they're not in a full group of people, they don't have a quorum and so forth. I was on the RTM when it was a social club in those early days of the 90s and the late 80s. It's unfortunate that, there were a dozen of us probably that felt uncomfortable because we were sitting there with a lot of people who, I don't know if they really paid much attention to what was going on. I know they didn't when it came to the certain issues with there was the trash and the incinerator. We were going to take all the trash from all the towns, even though the incinerator was broken, and I had a hard time convincing the RTM that if that incinerator was down for more than a week or 2 weeks or a month, our trash would just keep piling up from all the towns. So we limited the trash amount to, I think, 2 weeks at the most, and then every town had to do its own thing. And as far as Burroughs Field, we purchased that field for $275,000 at that time, and that was an issue with the RTM that we had to fight. And a lot of those people just, they weren't tuned into it. Look at how wonderful it is now when we go down to that field and we see all the students and the young children playing on that field. That was an issue that was brought up to the RTM, and it was difficult to get that through. So I think this charter revision is a welcomed document, and I hope that it goes to the people for a vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. I just had a few things. For me, the document is obviously a very important document, and I think that from my standpoint, we didn't go through this whole charter revision commission to have something fail. So my goal is to get something to present to the taxpayers and hopefully be successful, where the majority of taxpayers accept it. And so I think that some of the things that we're talking about tonight, I think I've said it before, that it needs to be a little bit tighter. It needs to have some of the loopholes figured out, and and some of the things that the council has talked about tonight, I think you need to take into consideration. To what I think it was Council Perizzotti, if it wasn't a document that I was confident to send to the taxpayers, I wouldn't support it. But I think that the amount of work that's been put into it shouldn't go to waste, and that there's definitely a document that could be had that would be passed on to the taxpayers. I think there's been 5. Harry was telling me there's 5 charter revision commissions since he's been on the council, and 4 of them have failed and 1 has passed. And I think that the number of items that are taken up for change, again, I think it was said by some of the members of the commission that it wasn't that many. And I see, every change is magnified because it's a change. And so, like some of the things like, I think it's 9.5 through 9.19 about purchases, I think Greg Bieber brought it up, are just like not ripe for change. Like, I think we need to focus on some of the bigger ticket items, make sure that they're cohesive and they're fair to everybody in the town, and we move it forward. But I think if it has too many changes in it, and that people will stumble with the changes and something won't get passed. So I think the council has listened to what the public said to us a couple of days ago, last week, and also take into consideration that there was a definite murmur in the town to have a charter revision commission established and have this point done. So my point is, I don't want to see it go to waste. And so I'm hoping that the commission takes it back and takes into consideration some of the things that were said, and we have we're set to meet next Tuesday, and we can have another discussion about it, and then that 15-day period will be over. So, Bonnie?
I was just
Mayor, I was just wondering if you would wanted to give the opportunity for the town manager or
course,
the
please.
attorney to give their, any thoughts.
I don't want to get mixed up too much on either side, but I also echo that. I appreciate everyone's time. I have a concern. My only real concern is the timeline, just making sure we have enough time to get each part of it done. That's really my only consideration.
Okay.
But you know me, I'll make it work, whatever.
I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to talk about the policy aspects of any of this. I will say that when we started to go through the document, you couldn't help but be impressed by the amount of work and thought and energy and devotion that went into it. I mean, it's a very impressive piece of work, and I'm not just saying that. It really is, and so all credit to the commission for that.
Thank you. So that's going to wrap up our talk on the charter revision. And again, thanks everybody for coming, and we're going to take a 5-minute recess. (0230) contingency transfer for tax increment financing district for 5 Corners. And basically, we go ahead, John. Why don't you?
At an earlier meeting that it would be $15,000 for the City of Groton to have the TIF district master plans done for Thames Street and for 5 Corners. And it was brought up the idea of whether we'd help them pay for that. They did allocate $15,000, but it was talked about, well, maybe we still want to, in a spirit of partnership, do something.
I think so. I mean,
So I'm just throwing out a recommend, just as a starter, of paying 50% of it out of our contingency fund.
Counselor
So
Graham, I think this was
$7,500.
you had brought it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, economic development does not,
Limited
end
to
at-
the city.
end in
Yeah.
different town lines, so.
And I did speak with Mayor Hedrick, and he was appreciative and thought that, I told him what he and I discussed this, and he thought it was a great idea, and they very much welcome it.
Okay, great. Anybody have any, I do have a motion, is that correct?
Yep.
I move to recommend that $7,500 be transferred from the general fund contingency account 10-741-5499 to account 10-460-5290 for the purpose of paying for 50% of the cost of the creation of the TIF district master plans for Thames Street and 5 Corners in the city of Groton. So moved.
Second?
A motion and a second, Deb?
Sorry, I just had a last second thought. Is there a reason why we're taking it out of contingency versus the economic development
There's no
fund?
set fee, about the only free money we have is the 10,000 that we would need out of the, I forgot what the line, I forgot what the budget's called, but for the taxi. There's really not money particularly there for this
Oh,
one.
in the
It
economic
wasn't budgeted
development
for this,
fund?
right. And so we would take out contingency and put it into their budget so that they could pay
Oh,
it.
I thought there was more money in there, I guess.
Great.
I would think that would be a
And
better spot.
And I spoke with Cindy about it, and that this was the recommendation.
Well, to your point, where's our TIF money coming from that we're using to develop our
Well, it's put in, we've expressly budgeted for that amount, not for beyond that, for 2 districts for us. It wasn't budgeted for the 2 for the city.
and there's no cost savings, doing more, you don't think, or?
Well, this takes into account that
Oh.
really, and it does, if you do them in conjunction, it would be higher without.
Right.
So there he took into account that we're doing 2, and then once you add, and there'd be one, it would have been a different amount if you just did a 3rd one, it would have been more, it would have been more than 7,500 for one, but when you add the 4th, then it gets it down to this amount.
All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8-0 to 0. 2017-0235, request for donation for Thames River Heritage Park water taxi. And this is actually looking for a donation for 2019 fiscal year.
Paid in June of 18, that's how we've been running them.
So-
And the money's in there, just hasn't been, the intent was there's 10,000 in the budget, but it's not designated expressly for this. So this is more to make it clear that this money's going to be used for that purpose, and that we'll cut it in June.
Harry? Here.
Oh,
It's a new
different?
one. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Resolution authorizing $10,000 donation for the Thames River Heritage Park Water Taxi Program. Resolved that the Town Council authorizes a $10,000 donation to the Thames River Heritage Park Foundation in June 2018 from account 100175230 for the Thames River Heritage Park Water Taxi Program. I so move.
Second, it's got to go to the RTM, doesn't it?
No, the money's already there.
Budgeted
There's no
already.
transfer.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this? Bonnie, do you want to?
Why is the resolution different than what's in our packet?
It's a minor change.
It's a minor change.
It's a minor change.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right,
It just
okay.
added, Cindy thought we could have done it through the motion, but she thought it'd be good to add in June 2018, because that's when we always cut it.
Okay.
So that they have it on their radar to
Yeah.
do it that time.
Just was curious.
All the whereases were the same.
So, Deb,
So we had brought this up once before. We donate the money. Never once have I ever seen where a penny of it is spent. They must have some kind of a budget that they
I
can
can give you
supply
the
us.
budgets. I've been receiving them.
Oh,
I can send them to everybody.
great,
People would like to see them.
thank you.
Ridership and expenses.
Yeah, I'd love to see
Okay.
that.
I can do that.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8-0 to 0. 2017-0228, interlocal agreement for regional community enhancement task force modification. John?
The council had previously passed the interlocal agreement. There's a request for East Lyme to be involved with it now too, so each participating community will have to, and I won't bring this to the council officially though until, I'd like a recommendation, but until I thought we'd have it's gonna be like a little paragraph addendum just saying we're adding East Lyme into it. But each of the member communities have to adopt a new addendum to allow that. So nothing will change on the provisions, it's just adding East Lyme in at the request of Chief Fusaro.
Great. Anybody wanna make
But I
a-
won't bring it forward if you go forward until I actually have that addendum
I'll
in
make,
hand.
I'll make a motion to add East Lyme to the interlocal agreement for Regional Community Enhancement Task Force.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8-0 to 0. 2017-0229, modification of rules, presentation by department heads at town council meetings. I think we put this on here. It was discussed of
Right.
throwing it over to the rules committee and then having them meet and present it to the council, but we decided just to put it on the committee of the whole. And John, do you want to explain what the,
Yeah, under the town rules, under Rule 7, Order of Business and Agenda, under 7, Communications and Reports, it would add an E for department heads, just so that we can have, as we talked about earlier, a few times
Open
now,
the
have them come, so it's pretty simple.
great? So I want to make a motion to that effect?
I make a motion to have the department heads come to the town council meeting in accordance to rule number 7.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to add that item on to under town manager for regular town council meetings.
Yeah, as the,
That's-
I mean, the text is simple, right? It's like E department head,
Yeah.
right? That's in the motion.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8-0. 2017-0223, adoption of the 2018 Committee of the Whole regular meeting schedule. I think it's all in our packet. Harry?
Yeah, this is just for town council. Be it resolved, the town council hereby approves town council regular meeting schedule for 2018 as follows. And basically, it is the first Tuesday of each month at 7:30 in this room. It says, wait a minute, there's only one change. There's a move to a Wednesday, November 7th because of Election Day on November 6th. So I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Harry?
Yeah, this is something we have to post, but we actually can vote and change it if we want to at some point during the year. This is our posted meetings, and if we meet any other time as a council, we have to hold a special meeting.
My only is this is the second year that we'll have been following this new schedule, and everybody is still okay with the way of having just one town council at the beginning of the month?
Dean
Just
and then
making
Bonnie.
sure we're still together?
Dean?
Now, what we did was, we adopted the fuller schedule before, and then we decided, let's not meet that third Tuesday. So have we been issuing cancellations of that meeting? Because we never changed the schedule. We never went back and adopted a new.
We did.
Did we actually adopt
Yeah,
a
we
new
did.
schedule? Okay, I was
did.
going to say, because maybe we would like to keep those Tuesdays open so we don't actually have to go back and change anything. But all right, if we actually if we're
We
working
did.
under
That I do
just
remember.
this same thing, then I have no problem with it.
Bonnie?
I just want to say that I still support this, but it seems like we've had a meeting almost every Tuesday anyway, so I'm not sure it's really saved us.
It's given us
We've had some-
flexibility to have special meetings.
That's
I think
right.
that's truly what,
Without meeting on a different day of the week for a
Yeah,
special.
I think it's great,
okay.
but we have had very few of those Tuesdays off.
All right, any other discussion?
True.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8 to 0 to 0. And 2017-0224, adoption of 2018,
Committee of the Whole.
I'm sorry, 2018-0223, adoption of 2018 Committee of the Whole regular meeting schedule.
Did you make that? Was that a
It's on the
motion?
back, no, it's there. No, I haven't made a motion.
Oh.
I'm bringing it up for, Ken? Harry, you want to make a motion?
I'll keep going. Be it resolved, the town council hereby approves the committee of the whole regular meeting schedule for 2018 as follows. And they're all listed. It is the, let's see, the second and the fourth Tuesday of each month. All meetings are at 6 o'clock in the town hall annex, right here in this room. I so move.
Except for Wednesday, December 6th, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, December 26th on Wednesday. Thank you for pointing that out.
What?
Because of Christmas, yeah.
Well, we're not going to meet
Any,
the
we have a
26th.
motion and a second, any discussion?
We're not going to meet the 26th either, let's be.
No, that's silly.
No, I mean, we'll keep it there, but I mean, it's for form.
Can we
Any
make
further
it
discussion?
On your own.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8 to 0 to 0. Now, 2017-0224, adoption of 2018 Personnel and Appointments Committee regular meeting schedule. I'll make a motion approving the 2018 Town Council Personnel and Appointments Committee regular meeting schedule. It is the first Tuesday of each month, except for November, it would be the Wednesday, and they would be initiated meetings at 6:30 in Community Room 1 of the Town Hall Annex. I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes 8 to 0 to 0. Consideration of committee referral items for town council referral list. Have any? Any other business?
Yeah, one thing, I know it's not going to make a referral, but I want to bring it up. I know that Greg, you talking about ethics and the status of it. And our town manager, who I thought had tons of things to do with the underwater, has still found time to do some research and make some pretty constructive suggestions. And even I am eager to get back on the ethics bandwagon. And so I think, but again, Greg made the referral, but I'd like to see it reappear. And really, what shape this takes should be like another subcommittee to look at the text, look at the suggestions, see if there's a way to address some of the current concerns brought up by our council.
Do we want to form that subcommittee tonight?
Do we have the authority to do that since we haven't been referred that?
Okay, I mean, we can put it on the next round.
Yeah.
But anybody interested in, I would certainly serve again, having served the first time.
Maybe you don't
On the
want me.
ethics
No, I
commission?
might be on it.
On the,
Yeah.
I'd be on it.
All right, we've got Bonnie and Rich, myself, Dean, Karen. So we have a number of people. I think we can figure it out by what the right number is and go from there. All right? John, anything?
No.
Okay.
I just wonder, can you have 5? That makes 5. So
That
you'd
makes a
have
quorum.
majority of the,
Yeah, probably not. I think we'll probably reduce the number
right.
and, yeah, figure it out.
You may have a change. I mean, this is going to take a little while, but the election may actually
Yeah, so we may want to
change
wait.
that.
Okay.
Move we adjourn.
Greg, did you have anything?
Yeah, I have one other thing. So for next week's meeting, do we owe anything for our discussion with the Charter Revision Commission?
I don't believe so. I think that they're going to kind of take into consideration what we've
gonna
said,
meet
and they're going to
and-
come
yeah.
back and,
Well, they won't really present anything, though. You'll have to officially vote on. I thought maybe I'd try my best to compile some of those
Yeah,
key
that's
issues
what
and then throw it out to you to see if I've covered everything, and then you can go basically piece by piece and vote to recommend things. Because that's what you have to do, is make a recommendation.
Yeah,
and
I
things.
think that, like what Harry did with his list, I think in the list that
Yeah.
you made, we should try to come up with a summary that we can give them.
Yeah.
And then I guess we will vote on all those things.
Well, I think the town manager's already gonna do that,
Yeah.
so
I'll at least
think-
throw something out for initial discussion.
Yeah, and
Go
then-
from there.
Yeah, and then we can work off of one
We definitely
document.
don't want to rehash
No.
every
Yeah.
detailed discussion we had today.
Right, if I might, that has to be a strictly ministerial kind of an exercise. We can't have any online, basically,
Right, right.
effectively an online meeting without
I mean, if you see a
notice.
major topic just generally that I may have missed, I think that would be fine, you know.
Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind. when
I'll give you my
do
list that I made.
communications. Okay.
Good starting point.
I'll move we adjourn now.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.